Today's Monday, and today it might be a little harder of a slog than a usual Monday. Why? Because Saturn's about to go retrograde, and Saturn is a planet of discipline and structure and having to just go with the grind. So, rather than focusing on so much the outer authority like your boss riding you too hard, you have to listen to your inner authority and get in touch with your own sense of discipline. I'm Sam Reynolds, an astrologer, and you are in the stream.
And I'm Malika Bilal, listening to my inner authority. It's unclear when human beings started looking up at the stars and planets for guidance, solace, or comfort. Perhaps astrology is as old as humanity itself. But something a lot newer, the digital age, has kickstarted a global astrology boom. Astrologer Amber Khan explains more.
I think there's a void being left by religious institutions falling apart, by lack of faith in pharmacology, lack of faith in psychiatry. People are looking for a different way to try to understand themselves without going to certain extremes. And astrology comes in on these new technological platforms and fills that need.
Astrologers and investors are seeing opportunity where the stars and technology align. According to one venture capitalist, the market is now worth over $2 billion US. And joining me to chat about the stars, the planets, and the tech behind it all are some of astrology's biggest influencers. From New York, astrologer Chani Nicholas. In Los Angeles, David Palmer, celebrity astrologist, also known as the Leo King. In Newark, astrologer Sam Reynolds, and in New York, Lucy Green is a futurist at Wunderman Thompson. Welcome to the stream, everyone. Chani, I'd love to start with you. How did you get into astrology in the first place?
I had a reading when I was 12 years old, and the astrologer read not only my chart, but my dad's chart and my new stepmom and her children's chart. And as a young child coming into a new family setup, the astrologer was able to facilitate a conversation that really helped me to understand the differences between me and my kind of new family setup, between me and my stepbrother and sister. And it really helped me to understand that we all work through challenges really differently and all come into whatever group setting or life or what have you with our own
It might. Jenny, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really spoke to me, and everything that the astrologer was saying felt really familiar. Mm-hmm. And in that familiarity, I was like, "What is this? How do you do this?" And she had written a book, and so I got that book, and I've been studying ever since.
Wow. From such a young age. So we have several people in our community who are interested in this topic, but aren't quite sure its uses. So I want to read a couple of those tweets. This is Mukhtar, who says, does astrology have any actual impact in our life? Another person writes in, this is Isa, and he says, does astrology really explain user behavior? So a couple of people with some questions there. Sam, I'll pass these over to you. How would you answer them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I came to astrology as a skeptic as it sounds some of these people are. And I've had that question many times, like, well, what's the impact of astrology in people's lives? One, it gives them a sense that they're not crazy, that some of the feelings and thoughts that they have, that someone else can enunciate and clarify them without really knowing anything other than their birth data. And I think that speaks to a lot of people. And some people need some sense of encouragement, to have some sense of time frame about what's happening in my life. I talked about Saturn at the start of the show. So someone may have walked into the office today and heard like their boss riding them, and they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe, how can I cope with this? And so they look to the stars and they look to an astrologer and get wisdom.
So you were a skeptic. Take us through your journey. How did you become a believer in astrology?
Well, I started off as a disbeliever for religious reasons. I was a fundamentalist at the time, fundamentalist Christian. And then I went into academia and I had swung the other way and become more of an atheist, and was more so looking at things in terms of race, gender, and class in graduate school. So I went to an astrologer because a friend wouldn't get off my back about being a Scorpio. I thought I was a Sagittarius. I'm on the quote unquote cusp. So I went there just to kind of silence her and just to have fun and to see what the astrologer was going to say. I thought it was just going to be a hoot. And he had some profound things to say to me. Specifically, he said things about my family dynamics that I hadn't told anyone. In fact, I had just learned recently myself. So I was like, oh, this has to be a trick. So I wanted to know what his trick was. So I spent 10 years studying astrology and thus proving I was a Scorpio as well.
Wow. Okay, so as a Scorpio here, and I love that you're laughing at that, Channy, but as a Scorpio here, talk to me then about what that means for you.
It means some measure of wanting to probe and get to the bottom of the truth, and having some way of learning to structure your inner and deep feelings, because sometimes you're not always clear where those feelings and thoughts come from. Sometimes feeling some shame about those thoughts and feeling like you have to shelter yourself. And so that's sometimes where the attachment or the statement about secrecy comes in about Scorpio, because sometimes we feel like we have to keep things in rather than learning to express them.
All right, so you just described me to a T. Basically, that is me. It is so nice to feel understood and to feel read also. But you talked a little bit about coming to this from a religious aspect and it not being something that you thought had value. David, I know you've spoken a lot about the stigma around astrology and that stigma that an astrologer faces today. I want our audience to have a listen, and perhaps you can break that down for us.
Yeah, well,
bringing the astrologer back into society. It's almost like being an astrologer has been axed out and we've been kind of put into our own little weird world. And I think that it's very important to utilize, all the aspects of connecting to what we think of celebrity and pop culture and bringing these ancient science practices and all this wisdom to the mainstream world.
Okay, take it away.
Well, there's a stigma, whether it's from science institutions or religious, but the stigma is actually so powerful because it's embedded in all of our lives. Astrology, our time system, the month equals the moon, 29-day cycle, or the menstrual cycle, 29.5 days. There's all these connections in our everyday life that astrology is embedded with, and having this stigma around it is why I think so many people are actually turning to astrology, because it's almost kind of like we're living in a world where we don't know the meanings of why we have this time system. Why are we going through these things? And it's with that stigma that is actually creating this discourse.
Jenny?
I always say to people that, I don't care if you believe, quote unquote, in astrology or not. I have no investment in convincing anybody about astrology. But what I think is so important is understanding the history of astrology, and that the history of astrology is interwoven with the history of medicine, of course, with the history of astronomy, with the history of science. And that, as David was saying, it's almost like it's invisibly embedded into so much of our culture and so much of our Western, at least not even just Western, but all kind of modes of thought. And so when we look at philosophy and the philosophical underpinnings of so many different systems, they have astrology interwoven into them. And even religious traditions also have astrology woven into them in some kind of fashion, because we grew up as human beings looking at and having a very deep relationship with nature because we didn't see ourselves as separate from it for so long. So as a Jew, I celebrate the new moon both as a Jew and as an astrologer, because it's actually, the new moon is actually embedded into both of those systems, and they actually came up and out of the same place. And so it's natural that there are so many places in which they intersect.
So I want to share with you the view of someone who most likely would agree with everything you just said there. She is an astrologer based in New York, and she sent us a video comment. You can see her Instagram page here, though, and this is where she does a lot of her interactions with other people. Her name is Janelle Belgrave, and here is what she talks to us about.
On one level, people use astrology to learn more about themselves on a personal level, but we can also use astrology to look at the world at large. As astrologers, we look at global events and environmental events. We look at social changes, and we see these patterns not only in the here and now, but in the past. And when we look at the past, what is the saying? If you don't learn from the past, you're going to repeat those same mistakes in the future. And I think that's what people are using astrology for now, as like a star map. How do we solve our issues using what is available to us, which is the heavens, the earth, and each other?
So Lucy, she has such a beautiful comment there and talking about using it as a guide from the past to kind of guide our future. But we have this comment here that I want to direct to you. This is from Wanti on Twitter, who says, astrology is a business rather than a science. It lets you blame faraway heavens for your mistakes. Doesn't that sound appealing? Now, the idea of it being a business is right, even if others may not agree with the rest of his comment there. But talk to us about the appeal and why this has become such a big business.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen an explosion of new products and services, and it goes beyond just sort of astrology and consultation generally, but products wrapping in the language of astrology and star signs and aligning with crystals. I mean, and also a new audience for this as well. So millennials and Gen Zs, so teenagers really starting to get interested in this stuff. And to me, there seems to be a few drivers. So one, I would align it with the well-being movement. Like all these new age practices are being seen as a way to aid in mental health, to sort of self-diagnose and to navigate the world as well as understand yourself, but also sort of find a bigger meaning. I mean, we just brought out a study this week called the anxiety economy, looking at the degree to which this sort of uncertain time is making people really ask sort of existential questions about the planet, their lives, and so on. And I think astrology has a really powerful role to play. Mm-hmm. And coupled with that, you just have all these new services like the Leo King, who are super hip and modern and appealing to this group and serving astrology up in a new way.
Super hip and modern. Yeah, please take that away.
I was going to say is that when you look at this whole entire economy with it, what it is the Mayans were right. 2012 was the end of the world that we know it. And people now, after 2012, are looking at the world and not knowing what's going on. And they're having to look at these places because this is what the Mayans talked about. This is the real astrology going down ancient times. And so when you come into this major reset in the calendar system, the news covered this for the whole entire year of 2012, thinking that the world was going to end. There were huge movies of this, destruction of the earth. The truth is that it was the destruction of this false earth that we did not know much about. We were all cloaked. We were all not given the truth of what the ancients were saying. So people now have to go look for it. It's great in business now because it's being shown in these ways to get people it, but there is still going to be that ultimate, jumping off the cliff of the old world and the old understandings and these old belief systems that have been embedded in holding us back from the truth.
Sam, so I'm wondering what you're thinking because your face looks a little skeptical. I want to direct you to this.
I'm completely skeptical.
First of all, hold on just 1 second because I want to share with you someone else who's a little bit skeptical before you weigh in. So this is a YouTube comment we just got from Rizwan, and he says, confused humans are miserable and they just want to feel happy and pay for it. That's all. Go ahead.
I think, so that in between the dire cynicism and maybe even pessimism of that statement compared to David's enthusiasm, I think that might be closer to a truth. My thought on this is that we've seen this before in terms of the enthusiasm related to astrology. Life magazine about 20 years ago had one of its main stories about astrology rising. So we've been here somewhat before. Now, of course, it's to a larger scale because 20 years ago, we didn't have the World Wide Web. So I think there's going to be a proliferation and a growth, but each cycle has that comparably in terms of the excitement and interest in astrology. And I've been anticipating this particular generation for about 10 years because Uranus, once I knew that Uranus was going to go into Aries and then into Taurus, I anticipated the growth of the Uranus and Sag generation. What does that mean? That's a particular group of people born between 1981 and 1988. And so I anticipated that they would have a stronger interest in astrology. So I've been waiting for them, and they haven't disappointed me.
I love it. Waiting for the millennials. I mean, what's been interesting to
before
us
they were millennials.
Well, from 81, sort of the older millennials, but we've been really interested in how also youth platforms have been reimagining what astrology looks like. So you see these amazing illustrations using social media more creatively. So go even beyond YouTube and making this stuff, I guess, accessible as or on digital platforms as you might consume any other lifestyle content, and making it feel very sort of, if it's an ancient practice, repositioning it, I guess, in a sort of in a youthful language that is understandable to those groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
and
also just want to
astrology.
say that this isn't
Chenny, you go
this
first.
isn't
Go ahead.
the first time that astrology's had a moment. Like, astrology's had many, many moments over thousands of years. There have been times and societies and places and moments where it was really in favor, and then it falls out of favor again, especially in the Western world. In India, it's pretty much stayed in favor and stayed with itself in its entirety. But this is one moment. This is one little peak in many. Mm-hmm. And so it's not shocking that it came back in favor, again, given the how things proliferate on the internet. But it also won't be shocking when it falls out of favor again, which I'm sure that it will. I don't know if it will in our lifetime or not, but this is the way in which many humans over many, many time periods have related to it.
Mm. So I wanted to share this reflection from Maria on Twitter. She says, this is a fun coping mechanism for her. I credit it for helping me keep my head above the water during one of the hardest times of my life. I wish people showed more compassion when Nancy Reagan, former First Lady, used it to cope with the assassination attempt on her husband. They were unfair and they were judgmental. And she goes on to say, I found a Tumblr blog that focused on astrology, and I found it fascinating. And I wasn't using it for predictions, but to figure out what life lesson I'm supposed to learn from the difficult experience. Most people who believe in astrology also believe in free will, by the way. So Sam, I'll direct this one to you, because this idea of using it for these hard moments in life, have there been moments where you've talked to people and that's exactly why they've turned to astrology?
Right, to understand kind of the significance of a moment of a relationship. I just had a client a few weeks ago who contacted me about wanting to understand what was happening or what happened in a relationship and how to move forward. And in terms of talking about moving forward, it wasn't so much that the stars have decreed, this is your way forward, there. It's more so the idea of here's some ideas, here's some ways in which to think about these planetary significations in order to kind of find a path. So I always say that, people are always concerned about fate. I say fate has two arms, and one of them is your own, and astrology teaches you how to work that other arm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to say to the point that I don't think that this is just another rise of astrology and then it will fall again. If you take Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, which were two probes sent by NASA in the late 70s, which reached in 2012, Voyager 1, what we call the heliopause. This is an area between the heliosphere. We are in a bubble in our solar system. Human consciousness has reached the edge of our solar system and is at this heliopause, entering into interstellar space for the first time as consciousness as we know. Voyager 2 reached it in 2018. No irony here, the peak of 2012 of astrology, the real extreme peak here in 2018. In the media, I'm able to go on television now, or we're able to do this without being castrated. Look at, I love the comment from the person who put up about Nancy Reagan with Joan Quigley. Joan Quigley was an astrologer and actually did plan out things for Ronald Reagan, and it was looked at as horrible in the media. Now today, I can go on Steve Harvey, I can go on all these amazing television shows, and people are willing to hear it and listen. This is not normal. This is not just a normal rise. This is the real deal. And this
not
is
normal for what? Not normal for what time frame, though? Like you're talking about modern culture. I'm talking about the stretch of astrological history. And I'm saying that there are times when astrology has been central to civilizations. This is maybe the beginning of another reoccurrence of that.
And I mean,
I'm trying to say that it's not a maybe.
Yeah, but there have been other moments too. Like Sidney Omar was like very close with Regis Philbin, and coming on his show and talking about astrology. So there have been times related to the era, as Chani is saying, where people have been excited. I'm not saying that this may not have some unique aspects to it,
right?
But in looking at it in this very cosmic sense, that this is going to be like a whole different aspect of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I'm skeptical.
Okay, so we'll see. So I'm going to pause that part of the conversation just a little bit, because I want to show you this and ask if this is the peak, perhaps. So this is a headline from Vox. According to Amazon's new horoscopes, the stars want you to go shopping. Prime members get monthly horoscope readings paired with suggestions to spend more money on Amazon products, and this is what it actually looks like. Here's that site, Prime Member Horoscope. This one is for March. Lucy, I want to direct this one to you because healing, if that is what you use astrology for, shouldn't exclusively belong to the elite, but does it?
Right, it's sort of making these well-being practices, I guess, a bit more accessible and also normalized. So I actually think this is quite a radical move for a retailer. Let's remind ourselves, a mainstream retailer like Amazon, to use astrology as a way to funnel and stimulate commerce. But when you think about it, it's not only sort of highly PR worthy and novel, but actually when you think about the growing audiences and regard for astrology, both for self-reflection, but also for understanding your day-to-day activities, there is a rationale behind it driving into commerce, whether, you need to look after yourself this week. Let's practice self-care. We have these following items, or it's shown that you need to feel more confident. Here are these 5 books. It's quite a novel way to and an accessible way for people to sort of talk about astrology, and we see that in the bigger trend as in it becoming more normalized and sort of regard for it becoming much more normalized rather than a sort of rarefied fringe subject.
Mm-hmm. And as that part of that normalization are the explosion of apps. So you can really just go to your phone and get some of that one-on-one time that previously you may not have before. Channy, we have this tweet here from someone who may be not convinced that the apps are the way to go. Issa says, I'm Libra, but I don't think it works. Another person writes in, this is pseudoscience. Channy, what would you say to them?
Are you're talking about apps or astrology in general?
Astrology in general is what I think these commenters are talking about, but I'd love for you to take this in the realm of now it's accessible in everyone's hands. It's on everyone's phones.
I want people to find the healing systems that work for them. I don't care if it's astrology or not. I know that astrology is having a moment. We were here before astrology was popular, and we'll be here after astrology has fallen out of favor. Again, and I just mean like astrologers in general. We're connected to something that is deep and it's rooted, and it's an entire system of knowledge. And you don't become an astrologer, at least not when I was coming up. You didn't become an astrologer to make money. You became an astrologer because it was a language that spoke to you, and I couldn't really do anything else. It was like the thing I was supposed to do. And so again, if it's not your language, if you think it's a pseudoscience, if you think it's, doesn't have any value to it, great, move on. I just really want people to find things that help them process the real challenges of being a human being in this day and age and always. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, of course, we're all inside of a capitalist system that loves to take advantage of whatever's popular and strip it of its essence and a lot of its meaning and sell it at, in mass ways. And that's going to happen inside of the system.
Are you saying the star sign lip balms don't work?
Yeah, and I just want to, Channy's being very charitable. And I think not just charitable in the sense that doesn't matter, but charitable in the sense that she's being open. Mm-hmm. I'm going to narrow it and challenge those people back and say that we've talked a lot about meaning. And people who are really into trying to dub astrology as pseudoscientific and all that, here's my kickback to you. My kickback is like, human life is more about meaning. There is no reason why we've chosen to call today Monday and you wake up and now we've met and all congregated at a particular time. There's no empirical reason why we use a sexagesimal 60-minute system. There's no empirical reason for how we're all drawn toward Amazon a particular way. We haven't figured all those things out. But what we do know is that the brain is hardwired for meaning, story creation. And that's what we have. We have this beautiful art, which is the collaboration between math and myth. Right. That's what astrology is. Mm-hmm. And so when people talk about, I'm
going to pause you there. I hear what you're saying there, but I want to answer this question before we run out of time. This is a tweet who says, can anyone throw light on year 2019 from an astrologist's point of view. So Channy, based on your research and your readings, give us a forecast for the next few days.
Oh, for the next few days. You said 2019. Okay. The next few days, if you want to use astrology as a tool for healing and creating meaning in your life, one of the most beautiful things and simplest things you can do is pay attention to the new moon and full moon cycles. And so new moons can be used as a time for beginning and a kind of initiation for self. We're having a new moon on Saturday, and so it is.
Channy, we will be looking out for it. Channy Nichols, David Palmer, Sam Reynolds, Lucy Green.